Welcome to the Lion's Share podcast, where we break down today's most impactful research and bring fresh insights from the academic frontier straight to you.
You know, if you're working in B2B marketing today, things have gotten, well, complicated. The straightforward buyer-seller thing, pretty much gone.
Oh, absolutely. What you have now is this complex customer buying system. It's like a web, right? You've got input coming from, what, 3 people?
Yeah.
Sometimes up to 12?
Exactly. All with their own agendas, different needs, different incentives. It's a maze.
It's the new reality. And for suppliers, look, this is a massive challenge. That traditional influence the salesperson had, it's really shrinking.
Yeah.
Buyers are doing their own homework now. They're online, checking review sites, social media. Often they're, more than halfway there before they even think about talking to a supplier rep.
So you can't just control the message from the outside anymore.
Nope. So if you, as the supplier, can't directly reach everyone involved, what's left?
You need an insider, someone already in the organization to basically sell for you, to champion your solution across that tricky internal landscape.
Precisely. And that brings us to buyer advocacy. That's the key term here. It's when an individual buyer decides to go the extra mile. It's what we call a discretionary extra role behavior. They actively support, represent, maybe even defend a specific supplier when talking to their colleagues.
All to boost that supplier's chances and get everyone on board internally, that consensus piece.
That elusive consensus, exactly.
And managing that, getting that internal push without accidentally creating pushback, that's the tightrope walk. Which is why we're diving into this really crucial 2019 research today. Lawrence, Crecelius, Scheer, and Lamb.
Yeah, it's a great piece.
Our mission here is to get right into their findings because they uncovered something. Well, pretty counterintuitive about how this all works. It's not just if advocacy helps, but really when and why.
And maybe before we jump into the findings, we should touch on the theory they used, because that's a significant contribution too, especially for, marketing scholars.
Right. They brought in cognitive response theories, CRT.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is actually quite novel in this specific area in organizational buying.
Okay, CRT. Sounds a bit theoretical, but break it down for us.
It's actually quite relatable when you think about it. CRT basically says that when you hear a persuasive message, like our advocate, pitching their preferred supplier, you're not just a passive sponge soaking it up. Your brain immediately starts generating its own thoughts about it. It's like an internal conversation.
Ah, okay. So you're not just hearing the pitch, you're actively debating it internally. Thinking about the pitch and maybe the person giving it.
Exactly right. You generate these self-generated cognitions. They can be positive thoughts. Yeah, this sounds good, which leads towards agreement or assent.
Or negative thoughts, objections, counter-arguments.
Precisely. Resistance.
Yeah.
And those thoughts, that internal reaction, it's mainly driven by 2 things.
Okay.
First, how credible you perceive the messenger to be. Do you trust this advocate? Do they know their stuff?
Makes sense. Source credibility.
Huge factor.
Yeah.
And second, your own existing beliefs. What do you already think about this supplier, this type of solution, or even just the advocate's judgment? Your priors matter.
So credibility and prior beliefs, they shape that internal reaction.
And that reaction ultimately determines your behavior, whether you'll back the supplier or not.
Got it. Now, before this research, I think the general idea was simpler, right? More advocacy, more sales, just push harder.
Yeah, kind of a linear view. This paper really wanted to dig deeper. They had 3 main goals, basically.
Which were?
1, nail down the actual economic impact of advocacy. Does it really move the needle on purchases? 2, figure out the conditions that win, what makes it more or less effective. And 3, uncover the why using CRT, what's happening psychologically.
Okay. And what they found, it wasn't that simple linear relationship at all, was it?
Not at all. This is the core finding, really, across their studies. They found an inverted U-shaped relationship between how intense the buyer advocacy is and how much the customer actually buys from that supplier.
An inverted U, meaning it goes up, peaks, and then comes back down.
Exactly. More isn't always better. In fact, too much can actually hurt.
Let's really underline the financial impact here because the numbers they found are, well, they're pretty striking.
They really are. First, the good news for advocacy. Moving from a low level of advocacy to a moderate kind of optimal level, that boosts purchasing by potentially up to 42%.
Wow. Okay. So advocacy clearly is important. It can drive significant growth.
Absolutely critical. But this is the big but, the real kind of gut punch for anyone in sales or marketing. Once that advocacy goes past the peak, past that moderate sweet spot, and becomes excessive, The advocate is just pushing too hard, too relentlessly.
Then what happens?
Purchases drop dramatically. They measured a potential 41% reduction in purchases compared to that peak level.
41% down from the peak. That's huge. That can kill a deal.
It's the too much of a good thing effect, plain and simple. In a high-stakes B2B world, going just a bit too far can swing things massively in the wrong direction. Millions could be on the line.
But wait a second. Why? If the goal is internal consensus, and maybe the advocate genuinely believes this is the best solution, why would their colleagues push back just because they're enthusiastic? Shouldn't they focus on the solution itself?
But that's where the psychology, the CRT part, really kicks in. The colleagues start focusing just on the solution and start focusing on the advocate.
Okay.
Remember those cognitive responses? Low to moderate advocacy. That feels helpful, justified, it generates positive thoughts, assent. Okay, this supplier seems viable. That's the upward slope of the U.
Right.
But when you cross that line into excessive advocacy, it triggers the negative cognitive responses, the counter-arguments.
People get suspicious.
Exactly. Colleagues are thinking, hang on, why are they pushing so hard? They worry the advocate has lost objectivity. Maybe they're too close to the supplier, too embedded.
Or worse, maybe they're pushing it for some personal gain, not what's best for the company overall.
Right. It introduces this element of internal political risk for the colleagues, too. They think, if I support this now, am I tying myself to someone who looks biased or maybe even compromised? It feels safer to resist, to maintain that appearance of objective deliberation.
So the excessive pushing actually backfires by damaging the advocate's credibility inside their own company.
Precisely. It undermines the very trust they need.
Man, that makes the supplier's job incredibly delicate. You need to encourage advocacy, but not too much. Find that sweet spot.
It's a fine line.
So, given that downside risk is so significant, how do you protect against it? How can a supplier or an advocate avoid triggering that skepticism? That must be where the moderators come in, right? The contingencies.
Exactly. The research identifies key factors that can change the shape of that inverted U, factors that help mitigate the downside of high advocacy, and they tie back neatly to those two pillars of CRT we talked about.
Credibility and prior beliefs.
You got it. Factors that either boost the advocate's credibility in the eyes of their colleagues, or factors that shape the colleague's prior beliefs in a more favorable way.
Okay, let's start with credibility. The first moderator they looked at was the advocate's industry experience.
Makes perfect sense, right? Someone with deep experience should naturally have more clout, more trust internally. Their arguments carry more weight.
Less likely to trigger those "are they biased" counter-arguments?
And the data backs this up strongly. Get this. When the advocate is highly experienced, a real veteran in the industry, pushing advocacy from that moderate level up to a high level actually increases purchases by 26%.
So experience allows them to push harder effectively.
It acts like a buffer. But now look at the flip side. If the advocate has low experience, they're newer, maybe less established, that same increase from moderate to high advocacy, it leads to a 22% decline in purchases.
Wow. So an inexperienced advocate pushing too hard is actively damaging the deal. That's a critical insight for sales management.
Huge. Choose your internal champion carefully and understand their internal standing.
Okay, so that's credibility. What about the other side, influencing the colleagues' prior beliefs? They looked at relationship characteristics, right?
Yeah, moderators 2 and 3 focus on the nature of the existing relationship between the customer, company, and the supplier. The idea is that the relationship context shapes how colleagues interpret the advocacy.
So if things are already going well with the supplier, colleagues are probably more receptive to hearing good things. Their prior beliefs are already leaning positive.
Exactly. The first one here is relationship growth, H3. Is the relationship expanding or contracting?
Okay.
When the relationship is in a high growth phase, more business, expanding scope, high advocacy is actually really effective. It leads to almost a twofold increase in purchases compared to low advocacy in the same growing relationship.
Because it confirms the positive momentum they're already feeling. See, this supplier is working out for us.
Makes sense, right? But if the relationship is contracting, if things are maybe winding down,
then high advocacy looks bad.
Really bad. It leads to a huge 47% decline in purchases.
Right.
It comes across as desperate or out of touch with the reality that the colleagues are likely already sensing.
Trying to force something that isn't working. Okay. And the last moderator?
Relationship length, H4. How long has the customer been buying from this supplier? And counterintuitively, maybe, longer isn't better here. Length acts as a negative moderator.
Negative. So longer relationships make advocacy trickier. Why?
Inertia. Think about it. Longer relationships mean colleagues' beliefs about that supplier are probably more established, more rigid. There are likely established routines, expectations. It's harder to change minds.
We've always done it this way syndrome.
Kind of. So this inertia, this rigidity, it dampens the positive effect of even moderate advocacy, and it makes the negative effect of excessive advocacy even worse.
So if you've used supplier X for 10 years, a really strong push for a new competitor feels more jarring, maybe more suspect, than if the relationship was only a couple of years old.
Exactly. The advocacy clashes more strongly with those deeply ingrained prior beliefs.
Okay, so pulling this all together for, say, a B2B sales manager, the takeaway seems incredibly practical.
Very much so.
You don't just want any internal champion. The ideal advocate is someone with significant industry experience.
Check. Credibility buffer.
Representing a customer where the relationship is relatively young or at least growing.
Check. Positive or less rigid prior beliefs among colleagues.
And if you have that combination, experienced advocate, young growing relationship,
then according to this research, you pretty much neutralize the downside risk of even high-intensity advocacy. You can encourage them to champion strongly.
That's a powerful formula.
It really is. And it highlights the key contributions of this paper overall. It gives us solid economic proof of advocacy's impact, maps out that crucial inverted U-shape, and importantly, brings CRT into the B2B buying context to explain the why, that psychological mechanism of resistance.
But there was one more subtle, almost darker point you mentioned earlier. Something about the absence of advocacy. The silent killer.
Ah, yes. This is a really important implication, I think. The findings suggest that minimal advocacy or just sort of lukewarm, perfunctory support can be especially damaging when it comes from someone who colleagues expect to be a strong advocate.
Like someone with high industry experience.
Exactly. If the seasoned expert, the person everyone trusts, is quiet or only gives a half-hearted nod.
That silence speaks volumes.
It really does. Colleagues notice, they think if they're not enthusiastic, there must be something wrong. It signals a lack of confidence, a potential red flag about the supplier or the decision itself.
That's a chilling thought for managers. Sometimes the damage isn't done by what the advocate says, but by what they don't say, especially when they should be saying it.
It underscores that suppliers need to not just find advocates, but really ensure they have the internal motivation and confidence to speak up effectively. That discretionary effort needs nurturing.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the next step? Where does the research go from here?
Well, a key point is that this study really focused on the buyer role as the primary advocate. But B2B buying centers are complex, right? You've got end users, technical people, finance executives.
So what happens when they become advocates? Does an engineer advocating carry different weight than a purchasing manager?
Good question. And maybe even more complex.
Yeah.
What happens when you have multiple advocates inside the customer, but they're pushing for competing suppliers?
Advocacy versus counter-advocacy. Now you've got internal conflict dynamics playing out.
Exactly. How does that influence the group decision? Understanding those multi-advocate, potentially competing dynamics, that's really crucial for getting a full picture of decision-making in these complex buying systems. That's where future work needs to go.
Fascinating stuff. Definitely gives us a lot to think about regarding how influence really works inside customer organizations.
It certainly does. It's not as simple as just finding a friend inside.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the nuances of B2B buyer advocacy.
Thanks for tuning into the Lion's Share podcast. If you enjoyed today's discussion, share it with a friend and join us next time for more ideas worth talking about. We'll see you next time.